Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim. He is the head of product engineering, Ascertia, UAE. Let me introduce him to you. Mr. Ahmed is the head of product engineering in Ascertia, with more than 17 years of experience in software architecture and implementation of large identity-based program involving technologies like PKI, digital signatures, smart cards, and digital identity, biometrics, access management, and SSO, strong two-factor authentication. So today, Mr. Ahmed is going to have a talk on qualified electronic signatures without in-person identifying proofing using biometric with face verification. Mr. Ibrahim, welcome, Mr. Ibrahim.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Mohammed.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay. First of all, thank you for this privilege. It's to join this amazing event. So first of all, again, thank you everybody for attending. And basically, it was like attending the previous session. It was very interesting to hear about banking and payments, patient care, and how the biometrics evolved a lot of areas in telemedicine and so on. I think it's a good time to introduce another dimension that biometrics has like an effect on, and also evolve the technology or the space of what we call electronic signatures. So I think you might be hearing new terminologies, a lot of some technical stuff, but hopefully it's always linked to how biometrics evolved the landscape of electronic signatures. So before I start talking about the qualified electronic signatures and so on, let me just give you a brief introduction, or let's say a history of how electronic signatures been evolving, and eventually how it was linked to to the biometrics and eventually what we call the face verification. So I like to talk a bit about history, but just bear with me, and it's like a lot of technical terminologies, but I'm talking about what we call PKI, it's public key infrastructure. So PKI, or what it will evolve later into digital signature and digital identity. It started with where the internet was very young in like 1994, when Netscape invented what we call SSL protocol to secure or encrypt the data transmitted between machines and servers over the internet. And this introduced us something what we call digital certificates, which basically they used to identify, a machine or a server. So it was made mainly to encrypt the data, but to identify a server, give it like an identity. But eventually this led to something that we call electronic identity. So electronic identity in the government strategy started using EIDs. So it's like a smart card, the ID card with chip that it contains what we call later a digital identity. So they realized from the previous usage of digital certificate identifying servers and machine, why not we can use it to identify, a natural person. So we can include a digital certificate on his ID card. He can use it for a lot of stuff like encryption. And later on, we figured out the digital signature. But this process basically is like based on government processes, providing documentation to prove your identity, going through a process where a physical person identifies yourself and make sure that you are the person who are claiming to be. And this is what we call the in-person verification process. It's also worth mentioning at this period that electronic IDs also contain the biometric information. But at that time, what we did know about biometrics only fingerprint. So fingerprint was equal to biometrics at that time. But later on, when the government or a lot of other enterprises started providing what we call e-services or online services, they also realized that we can still use the electronic ID cards to improve the services and make sure that we are offering the services through channels where the users can identify themselves through ID cards. But eventually this led to some challenges or complications. I'm not talking about the technical challenges, but eventually the legal framework around this. How can I make sure that this person is actually, his identity is claiming to be, and what is the legal framework if he's signing a transaction, it doesn't have any legal meaning. So although it has like a security meaning, it can protect the integrity of the data, the transaction, make sure it's secure, it's not changed, it's not tampered with. But still, there is a lot of legal issues around this. How can I make sure I link this to his identity? It doesn't have any legal meaning at that time. But at that time also, there was a lot of what we call the laws and regulations started by international bodies and some of local bodies to introduce, the legal aspect of the digital signature. How the digital signature can have the same legal meaning as like the handwritten signature and so on. But these signature laws or regulation, as we figured out later, is still relying on a process that we need in-person verification. So I need to issue a digital certificate for someone. I have to prove his identity, make sure that he's the right person and so on, and also using some biometrics. So it was like very interesting at that time, and especially it happened in UAE. I remember that you can have your smart ID card going to a kiosk to prove your identity to this services by government, for example, and you can provide your fingerprint biometrics to this kiosk, and then you can. This is how you prove your identity without being, in physical touch with a person who's verifying your identity. What we call in the PKI is like a registration authority, and then this evolved into what we call third generation PKI. We started offering what we call remote digital signing. So remote digital signing is relieving users from using, smart cards, PKI, USB tokens, and these kind of physical tokens that can be lost, that has a lot of other issues. But eventually I can sign my contracts or whatever transactions remotely without having any obligation to have specific hardware, readers, and this kind of stuff. So we remove the burden from user to have this kind of stuff. But eventually his own keys is protected securely under some other regulations. So we are providing sign anytime, anywhere, using any device, but still the challenge is still to have this kind of identity or credentials to sign. I still need to go through a process that we call the in-person verification process eventually. So it's still challenging. And this leads us to another era where we started the digital transformation and mobility using the remote signing. And at that time, COVID pandemic happened. So now there is a need for everyone to have a digital signature to start, carry on his work remotely without any complication. But at the same time, we still have challenges because we still need some physical interaction with the user to prove his identity. And this is actually the link here between the digital signature and the PKI world as a dimension, and how the biometrics help us to overcome these complications, without in-person verification, as we used to say. And with the evolving technology you have seen, I think, I'm sure that we have seen this in a lot of sessions in the previous sessions in this event, the face verification, or what we call also the liveness checks, where we use an AI-powered program to verify not the face of the user, and make sure that he's a live person, he's not like impersonating somebody, is not like a 3D printed mask. And this AI technology that help us to do this verification remotely without any interaction with a physical person. And this moved us from the traditional fingerprint biometrics to the new biometrics era of facial verification, not facial matching. I'm sure that the difference. It's not like one-to-many, it's a facial verification one-to-one with the liveness checks and the AI-based technologies that moved the biometrics to the next era. And this is actually, again, the link between what I'm talking about, the qualified electronic signatures and the biometrics, and how it helped evolving the technology and taking us to the next era of digital signing. So before I talk about qualified electronic signatures, I have some few definitions, if you bear with me. So qualified electronic signature, or I used to call it qualified digital signature, is another electronic signature. But the difference between the qualified and the normal, we used to call it advanced electronic signature, is that it has a highest assurance level that gives the electronic signature a legal perspective. So it can be used in court. It can be used to move any paper to paperless process into any organization or government. But eventually, qualified electronic signature is based on what we call qualified certificate. This is a certificate issued for a person, but it serves like a proof of his identity. So eventually, to issue this qualified certificate, we need a process for what we call identity vetting or identity proofing. So identity proofing is again, this is the process that we use traditionally to identify the identity of a person. And in our space or landscape of digital signature, there's a lot of regulations and those that by a lot of international and local bodies. For example, the European Union is using what they call EIDAS regulations, which stands for Electronic Identity Advanced Signature. This is a set of regulations and standards to govern how we can prove the identity of a signatory. And again, in Europe also there is standards that's coming from ETSI. Please don't mind the numbers of the standards. If you have any question on this later, we can take it after the session. Also in US and other areas of the world, they're using the NIST standards to regulate how identity proofing is happening, and also some other standards, or what we call the international community, like a web trust. So this regulation usually has the process was traditionally how to identify a person using an in-person process. That's traditionally an applicant goes to what we call an RA officer, provide his identity documents. Maybe he can verify himself with a biometric fingerprint. It depends on the process, but eventually there is like an operator, in physical operator, he verifies these documentations and look at the person's face and do whatever needed to make sure the identity is what he's claiming to be. But now with the face verification, liveness check, the technology had helped us to do this remotely without any physical interaction. So at the same time, keeping the regulators happy. The regulator has all all what he needs. So the regulation started to adopt these technologies after they prove it's like viable and have the same level of security and level of assurances and so on. So it's providing a high level of assurance using and for example, an AI powered solution like face verification and trusted liveness check that goes through, there is a process to to certify a liveness technology to make sure that it answers all the criteria of liveness checks and make sure this is like a valid person. It's not a photo in front of the mobile camera. It's not a 3D printed mask. It's not a moving video or deep fake. It goes through all these processes. In Ascertia, we are using these technologies in combination with other technologies. Like, for example, in UAE, the ID card has what we call NFC chip that has the user data on it. So we can extract the user data from the card, match it against the facial verification and liveness checks and so on. So we can validate the person identity. And this is, I know it's a long introduction about qualified electronic signatures. But moving forward with this technology has enabled us to do what we call a digital onboarding. I'm sure we have seen this in a few banking applications already. It's very similar to the eKYC process. But we have the same, almost similar regulations as in banking in digital signature space, to have the same kind of assurances when we are issuing a digital certificate for a user, because digital certificates is basically another attribute of identity. So it's sometimes it's considered as the user identity. So if I'm having a digital identity, I have to go through all of these areas that, how securely user is onboarded remotely, because if I'm onboarding user remotely, there is a lot of other security criteria I have to figure it out, and the protection against identity theft and fraud risks, again, with liveness checks and these kind of technologies help us to answer all of these security issues. Eventually this again gives the user access to his, a very private keys to use it in very sensitive, sometimes legal transactions. Meeting with compliance and the convenience, and convenience is actually the main key that the digital onboarding helps us to answer. It's like I need to register a user or onboard him digitally in a very simple and intuitive process, and this is how the facial verification and liveness check help us to achieve in very quick and intuitive way. So basically, this is the topic I was talking about. I have this slide. Maybe it's too technical for this kind of event, but in Ascertia, we're building this kind of infrastructure or solution to answer the whole qualified electronic signature with digital onboarding and the biometrics. So basically, the user will have a very simple mobile application where he can have the auto identity, or we have another alternative if it's not possible for some regions or areas in the world, where he can chat with a live operator, eventually using again some biometric technologies like face verification and so on. And go through this system that the back end of onboarding has to answer to regulations again, keeping what we call enrollment evidence, and for audit purposes that this process was according to the regulations and local laws and so on, with a lot of matchers in the background to do the face verification. Sometimes we can also still use the fingerprint and so on. But eventually, for a user, it's very simple. He has not. It's a very transparent process. The user has nothing to do with this complicated technology. He's just spending a few minutes on this application. Then he's onboarded to this business application and can do digital signing on his contracts, on whatever legal documents or transaction he's doing. So this brings me to the last slide. How this helped us to achieve the business outcome, basically. So this is like a quick overview of the process. Usually the customer is enrolling into a qualified electronic signature platform with an enterprise system, so he can do the facial verification, present his ID card and so on. But the main difference here between the traditional process and the new one is like this process actually can take up to 3 minutes in total. Previously, it used to take like 2-3 days. In some countries, it takes like weeks to get your digital identity and start signing documents and so on. Once you have onboarded, you have a digital certificate, you can go on with day-to-day business. You can sign your minutes of meetings or whatever with your digital certificates. You can have your approval cycle internally in any enterprise. Once you have this digital certificate, you can start signing contracts with suppliers and so on, and so many other business use cases. And it's all now available, made easy or simple because of the AI and biometrics. And I think that's it for my quick presentation. I hope I didn't take a lot of time, so I'm open to questions if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. Really, it was nice and it was enlightening. Basically, how the system is moving and how we are moving ahead with this authentication. I'll just ask one question, which is really very significant for us, is how do you feel that the electronic signatures OTP versus biometric signatures? So what do you feel? How secure is this regarding electronic signatures OTP, what we get, and the biometric signatures? So how secure is this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because actually we have this discussion like on a daily basis these days in Ascertia. Yeah. Because in our solutions like Signing Hub or our signing server, we used to use what we call the OTP, like SMS OTP, receiving OTP in your mobile phone to authorize a digital signature. So yes. Each time, and this is by regulation, by the way. And we have other alternatives, but biometrics had helped us to move into a new, because SMS is deemed to be not secure anymore. For some security reasons, it can be intercepted. You can lose your phone. Someone can somehow get access to your phone and read the SMS messages. So now we're moving to OTP. So it's still, I don't call it OTP. It's like facial authorization. So you can authorize a signature using like a 1-second facial authorization. We have a mobile app that can capture your face, do a liveness check, and make sure that you're the right person, and then we can authorize the signature, unlock your keys, and then you can sign the document. So and this happens every time you sign a document. So before, this was not even possible because of you have to authorize the signature every time you sign. So every time you sign, you go through a long process instead of OTP, a security process, receiving an email link, you lose it, the time expires. But with facial verification, liveness check, this has been done like in a few seconds. You can authorize the signature anytime, anywhere again, and without even having your SMS security issues. Hope this answered the questions.
Yes. One more small question with you.
Yeah.
What are the challenges you feel to implement biometric signatures for both government and private setups? What do you feel the challenges you are going to face?
So usually the challenges is not related too much to biometrics. It's all about confidentiality, especially in governments. But yeah, the main concern is like biometrics is usually in this part of the world is something that's owned or regulated by the government itself, and this is something usually challenging to do. Like what I mentioned, face verification, we have to integrate with a back end with a government entity, and dealing with data privacy. We don't need to persist or save biometric data on our server. We are a digital signing solution. We don't care about saving PII data of the users, so it's not our own business. And this is the main challenge. We have to do the biometrics without even saving anything like a mobile phone or on our servers. We have to deal with it in a very private and secure way. And this is the actually main challenge when it comes to biometrics. And
so thank you so much. So now this brings the end for today's session. So I really want to thank everybody, starting from Dr. Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Hamad, Mr. Mohammed, Mr. Jalil, Mr. Shuwangar, Mr. Shahid, Mr. Ramzi, and Mr. Ahmed. Today we had a very nice, exciting session. It was really enlightening. We were able to discuss about few very sensitive, very important points regarding the people's security, the innovation in telemedicine, in e-health, which is going to come, the innovation which is going to make travel seamless, the e-payments, the electronic signatures, and lastly, about catching all those unlawful activities through biometric. So we had a very nice interactive session today. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Junaid. I would like to once again thank our sponsors, One Cosmos and Guardian One, Tech5, Zwipe, Graba, Ascertia, and Entrust for showing their support. Thanks again to all the speakers. You've taken time out, you've been wonderful, and you've enlightened us, giving us your insights. Thank you so much. And you all for being the most lovely audience. It was wonderful. You all gave us all your support and showed in large numbers. And I hope you had great sessions. You did a lot of networking, and we'll see you again very soon. Thanks once again to our chairpersons for day 1 and day 2, Mr. Faraz Antoon and Dr. Junaid. Thank you so much for facilitating the event and running it so smoothly. So thank you, everyone. You can continue networking till 5 p.m. Our platform is open. You can network with each other through the networking zone, and you can reach out to our sponsors and partners via their booths in the sponsors and partners section. We will be sending you the recordings and the post-event report within 2 weeks of the event. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can get in touch with our team and we'll be happy to connect. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a great evening.